Transnistria, or as the local population calls it, Prednestrovye. It is a topic that does not get a lot of media coverage. However, it still deserves to be acknowledged. It is, after all, the second largest territorial dispute in all of Europe. With that being said, today I'm going to be talking about Transnistria, an unrecognized, self-proclaimed state. The piece of land is located on the eastern bank of river Dniester and has been in a frozen conflict for the last 30 years. For half a century, Transnistria has been part of the Moldovan SSR since Moldova was occupied by the USSR in 1940. And that was so until the late 1980s, when the communist regime in the country weakened and the republics began revolting against the central power in Moscow. Officially, Moldova got its independence in 1991. However, the republic was already functioning pretty much independently for several years prior to that. Transnistria was established in 1990, fearing that if Moldova gains independence, Transnistria will be forced to become part of Moldova, which they did not want. So they proclaimed independence, hoping that they can stay independent from Moldova together with the USSR and Russia. Now, to understand why they would want to do this, we have to look at the history and the ethnic population in the region. Now, the history of Transnistria, Moldova, and Romania is pretty long and complicated, and I will not go into the details. However, I will outline the most important specifics to understand why they made this decision in 1990. The medieval Principality of Moldova emerged in the 1350s, so the current ethnic group lives there ever since. It then became a vassal state, so a state under the influence and the control of the Ottoman Empire, and was so until 1812, when this territory was seized to the Russian Empire. As part of the Russian Empire, it was a subject to the policy of Russification, under which many Russians and Ukrainians were moved into the territory, whilst the Moldovans were forced out of it, changing the ratio of the population, making it more loyal to the central power, the Tsar or the Emperor in St. Petersburg. The remaining part of Moldova, which was not occupied by Russia since 1812, joined with Wallachia, today's Romania, and existed so independently from the Ottomans, known as the Kingdom of Romania. Then the Russian Empire collapsed after the February and October revolutions in 1917. Most of Bessarabia, except the part to the east of river Dniester, united with the Kingdom of Romania in 1918 and existed as an independent state until 1940, when, according to the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, Soviet Union invaded and took Bessarabia from Romania, which led to the creation of Moldovan SSR. However, Transnistria was in the Soviet Union from the beginning. Remember that it was to the east of river Dniester. It was part of the Ukrainian SSR since 1920, called an autonomous Moldovan Republic with the capital of Tiraspol, the capital of Transnistria. After Moldova, then known as Bessarabia, was occupied, Transnistria's territory formally became part of the Moldovan SSR with the capital in Chisinau. See the twist? So Transnistria went from being united with Moldova to being under the control of Ottomans, then to being divided into two. Transnistria was with the Russian Empire, Moldova was with the Romanian Kingdom. Then in the Soviet Union, again divided in two. Then since 1940, to get united with Moldova, part of Romania, under the Soviet Union as the Moldovan SSR, and then after the collapse of Soviet Union, semi-independent from Moldova, Moldova being fully independent as a country. Much of Moldova, and especially its eastern part, were under the policy of Russification, especially so in the Imperial and Stalin's times, who was known for Russifying and sending a lot of Russians to the occupied territories. This significantly changed the ratio of the people living in Transnistria. As of 1989, only 40% of the local population were ethnic Moldovans. The rest, about 54%, were Russians and Ukrainians. And these people did not want to become a minority that they would become if Transnistria were to become part of Moldova. The government was of the same opinion, so they preferred to stay closer to Russia rather than become part of Moldova. To do so, they had to proclaim independence. So Transnistria proclaimed its independence in 1990. And in fact, Transnistria was not the only region of Moldova which attempted to proclaim independence after the Soviet Union collapsed. Another region named Gagauzia also proclaimed independence in the 1990. However, Moldovan government managed to negotiate with it and come to a conclusion. The two reunited. The same was unfortunately not possible with Transnistria. There were several military encounters between the two in 1990 and in 1991 and 1992. The first one was in 1990 after the Transnistrian Declaration of Independence. Moldovan forces entered the city of Dubashari. However, they were unable to cross the bridge over Dniester as the people barricaded it. As the result of the encounter, 3 were dead, 16 wounded. Another attempt to cross the bridge took place in 1991, also in vain, with 4 Moldovan troops dead and 27 Transnistrians taken prisoner. The war, however, officially started later, a year after that, in 1992, when Moldova was recognized by the UN as an official sovereign country. The conflict lasted for 3 months until the 14th Russian Army, under the command of General Alexander Lebed, intervened on the side of Transnistria and put an end to the conflict. Moldovan forces, being unable to do anything, were forced to withdraw from Transnistria, and Transnistria remained in a state of frozen conflict for more than 30 years. Transnistria is not recognized by anyone, however, it does have its own government, its own passports, not recognized by any single sovereign UN member state, and their own constitution. And this, imagine, for the last 30 years. You might be wondering, what is it like living in an unrecognized state? Well, as you might imagine, it is not very good. Transnistria is only recognized by other non-recognized states on the post-Soviet space, such as Abkhazia, South Ossetia, and until recently, Nagorno-Karabakh. The state is experiencing a strong emigration, with the population having decreased by 35% since 1990, from 706,000 to 465,000 in 2019. The largest ethnic groups are Russians, Moldovans, and Ukrainians, making up about 30% each. Although Transnistria has its own passport, almost everyone in the country has a passport of a recognized country: Moldova, Romania, Russia, or Ukraine. Transnistria has also an aging population issue, which means that a very large portion of the population is in the retired age, about 28%. Per retiree, there is about 0.75 people of working age, a direct consequence of the emigration of the young workforce to the nearby countries. The GDP of Transnistria is 1.2 billion USD with $2,500 per capita, 3 times less than that in Moldova, Moldova being the poorest country in all of Europe. The state is also highly import dependent. The value of import is 250% that of export. So per $1 million worth of exports, there is 2.5 million worth of imports. Not only that, a large percentage of pensioners, that means that a very large portion of the GDP must be used to pay out their pensions. It is clear that Transnistria's economy is absolutely not self-sustainable. It is fully reliant on Russian help, which pays out the pensions to the retired people, provides healthcare and welfare to the society. Russian armed forces are stationed in Transnistria, 1,500 troops. Although it is important to mention that officially Russia does not recognize Transnistria as a country, but it is clear that they do support them. So why not just recognize them? Well, that's a very interesting question. It has to do with the gas imports into Transnistria. You might have heard of Gazprom, one of the largest Russian gas exporters. So this company delivers gas to Transnistria and Moldova, but Transnistria basically gets all the gas for free. Now, the scheme is pretty complicated, but the most important is this. 2/3 of all the gas from Gazprom that is going to Moldova is going to the region of Transnistria. But neither side pays for the gas that goes to Transnistria. Neither Transnistria nor Moldova actually pay for it. So Transnistria gets it for free. Why is Gazprom okay with that? Aren't they losing money? Well, yes, they are. They are losing money. But as all large companies in Russia, Gazprom is very closely tied to Moscow and government in Moscow, for which it is incredibly convenient to have this scheme going on. Now, firstly, they get to have full control over Transnistria, With the Transnistria's economy being fully reliant on Russian gas exports, it basically means that Moscow has the full control over the region. If they were to cut these exports, then Transnistria's economy would collapse and the government would fail. And of course, the Transnistrian government does not want that. Now, there is also the second reason. The second reason being they get a political lever on Moldova. Now, since Russia doesn't recognize Transnistria as an independent country, formally, for them, it is part of Moldova. So all this money, this debt that is to be paid out for gas, could be given to Moldova. Chisinau could be burdened with it. And over the years, this debt has reached 3 billion United States dollars. With Moldova's economy being 17 billion, this makes a stunning 15% of their GDP. Of course, they cannot pay this much. So Russia basically gets to control Transnistria and pull a very strong string in Chisinau with this potential burden of the gas prices. Okay, so the economy is bad. The state is totally dependent on Russia, which could use it as a coin at any convenient time. Not ideal. And also, a single company owns half of all business and controls the government. Sheriff. It is the largest taxpayer in all of Transnistria and the company with the most employees, 13,000 workers. It owns everything: gas stations, markets, factories, even a football club which defeated Real Madrid twice in 2021 in Champions League group stage. The company has a monopoly on most businesses and controls the government, as I said. It emerged in 1993. The two founders were ex-KGB agents. When the monopolization of the previously state-owned companies started, these two were able to use their political and underground connections to reach to power. Not only were they able to monopolize much of the businesses, their company for a long time was the only company legally allowed to sell alcohol, tobacco, and fuel in Transnistria. Besides that, Sheriff was the only company allowed to exchange unrecognized Transnistrian rubles into an actual currency. All of this, of course, made them extremely rich and extremely influential. Today, almost every single member of the Transnistrian parliament has a certain tie with Sheriff and are in one way or another under their influence. And this all may sound like a conspiracy theory, but this really is a proven fact. So what does the future hold for the Transnistria and its people? One can't really say. However, it is certain that the majority of young people are leaving the country, which means there will not be a workforce to develop and boost the economy further. And with Ukraine cutting off the gas supplies as of January 1st, 2025, Transnistria is left without their free gas, which was so crucial for their economy. With this, their economy might collapse, and if that happens, no one can really say what is going to happen in the region. One has only to hope that the issue of this unrecognized self-proclaimed state is resolved and that all the people are at peace and reunited once again. Thank you for watching.